Greetings, Jonathan here, aka Rhino from the Ultimate Diamond Information site at goodoldgold.com. Today we're going to be having some fun with fancy colored diamonds, and particularly fancy yellows. So we're going to give you a little background. We have a client right now who's looking at fancy yellow diamonds with us, and we're going to be looking today at 3 different varieties of fancy yellows. But before we do, I just want to give you a little bit of background because we get questions about fancy colored diamonds from time to time. And when we're doing searches for fancy colored diamonds, they are broken down generally into 9 different categories. In each category referencing the intensity or depth of color that is present within the diamond. These 9 categories, a diamond will either be classified as faint, very light, light, fancy light, fancy, fancy dark, fancy intense, fancy vivid, and fancy deep. Alright, so those are the 9 different categories of color tone that a diamond can be described as. Today on this list, we're going to be taking a look at fancy, fancy intense, and fancy vivid to kind of give you guys an idea of just what kind of color or depth of color you can expect to see when you're looking at these different colors, because how intense the color is going to dramatically impact the price of the diamond that you're looking at. And 4 diamonds that we're going to be looking at today. One's going to be about a 4.5 carat. It's going to be a fancy yellow oval. And just to give you an idea on pricing, this is a diamond that comes in around the neighborhood of $60K. We're also going to be taking a look then at a fancy intense cushion. Alright, and this is a diamond now just jumping those 2 shades from fancy, then bypassing fancy dark and going to fancy intense, increases the value of the diamond. This diamond jumps in price up to about 115K. All right, and then we're going to look. We're going to go one more to a fancy vivid, but the fancy vivid we're going to look at is going to be like around a 6 carat, and the price jumps up to in the neighborhood of right in that neighborhood of 300K. So this is going to be a very interesting video to watch as you see the color differences from fancy, fancy intense to fancy vivid. We're also going to look at these diamonds alongside of a colorless diamond, so you have a point of reference for the color, a D-colored diamond that I have here, and we're also going to look at it next to a P color. Okay, it's not considered a fancy yellow, just a warm colored diamond, so that we have some kind of point of reference to look at. All right, and also before we get to peeking at these, I thought I'd just at least show you what a GIA report looks like with regards to fancy colored diamonds. At the top of the GIA report, you'll always have your, the date of the report, the shape and cutting style, its measurements, its weight, the basic measurements of depth and table, girdle, culet, polish, symmetry, and the clarity grade. By the way, not all fancy colored diamonds will be submitted to get a clarity grade. Some manufacturers will just submit it to GIA to get the color grade. But on this report that we're looking at here, you're seeing the clarity as well, which in this diamond was an SI1. This is the fancy vivid we're going to be looking at in this video, actually. Okay, now when we get to color, initially they're going to give you the origin of color, and they're going to tell you whether it's natural or not natural, okay? Because there are colored diamonds on the market. There's a lot of them now that are irradiated. You can actually make the color of a diamond fancy by submitting it to radiation, and that wouldn't be natural, and of course would be a lot less expensive. So you can get diamonds that are not naturally colored. You can get colored diamonds that are not naturally colored that are considerably less money. All right, the next is the grade, and here is where we see those breakdowns of the shades. And this diamond, as you can see, is graded on the GIA report as fancy vivid. and then beneath that will be what color that the diamond is. And diamonds can come in a variety of colors. We're going to be looking at yellows in this clip. They are perhaps the most popular fancy colored diamonds, but diamonds can be blue, green, violet, red. They come in pink. They come in quite an assortment of colors. Of course, these other colors, which are even more rare, cost considerably more money. So then it also lets you know the distribution of the color. And in this diamond, it is even. We generally are going to look for that in the fancy colored diamonds that we acquire for our clients, because we like a nice, even distribution of color throughout the diamond. Colors aren't always evenly distributed. And then the report will also tell us if the diamond has any fluorescence or not, which is usually blue, but can also be different types of colors in fluorescence. All right, so now that we've looked at the GIA report on what you can expect to see on a fancy yellow, and you know the categories they're broken down to, now we're going to get down to looking at the diamonds. First, we're going to look at them critically against a flat white background and show them to you next to colorless, tinted, and then we're going to look at the fancies. All right, this is going to be fun. All right, as we begin to look at color, I thought I'd put on the tray a colorless diamond. This diamond is a 313. It's a DVS2 cushion cut, August vintage cushion that we have in the inventory, and that's what colorless looks like upside down against a flat white background. Okay, this is the exact lighting conditions that GIA grades color in. We're under a very specific temperature daylight against a flat white background. Now this diamond I'm putting alongside of it is a P in color, all right? This is not yet considered a fancy color diamond, but you could plainly see the warm color. This is just an inexpensive, warmer colored diamond, although it is cut very nicely. That's an August vintage round. Now, as we put those two out, we're going to bring out our first fancy color, and this is a diamond around the 4.5 carat range. It is an oval shape, and this diamond is classified at GIA Laboratories as a fancy yellow, and you can see the distinct difference in color from this diamond to the P that is alongside of it. A beautiful, beautiful fancy colored diamond. We're going to look at all of these face up as well, of course, to show you the depth of color. But right now we're just looking at grading for grading purposes. Now, we're going to put alongside of it, this is going to be a fancy intense cushion. So we're jumping from fancy, we're going past fancy dark and up to fancy intense in this cushion. All right, I'm going to kind of slide, I'm going to move this P out of the way for a second, just to make more room on the screen and show you the difference from colorless to fancy yellow to fancy intense. Now there is remember, there is a big price jump when you go from fancy to fancy intense. Okay. So we're getting a little bit of glare on that. But there you can see, right there. All right. Now, to top this off here, we're going to put a fancy vivid. All right. Wow, look at the depth of color in that one. All right. You will see the vividness. We'll be able to note the color differences more too when we look face up. But you could definitely see your color differences from colorless to fancy intense, and to fancy vivid. Here's how we're seeing it in the lab as we look upside down against a flat white background. So colors will be looked at here, but more importantly, the color is going to be observed in the face-up appearance, because the way a fancy colored diamond is cut will either enhance or detract from the face-up vividness or intensity of the color. The way that they cut these is generally different from the normal thinking in cutting, because when they cut a fancy colored diamond, they want to bring out the color and not detract from it. There's another fancy intense that I have here. I'm just going to kind of throw in the mix as well. This is a 569 radiant cut. All right, so here we have now on the screen fancy yellow, fancy intense, another fancy intense, and then a fancy vivid. All right, now we're going to look at all these diamonds face up and show you the differences in color that we see in the face-up view under the same lighting. Okay, as we look at color in the face-up view, we're still under that same lighting, and we're looking at the D color alongside of the P color face up against the flat white, where you can plainly see the color differences in warmth from the D to the P. Okay, now we're going to slide onto the screen here. That's the fancy yellow, and look at how much more colorful that diamond is when we look at it next to the P and then also the D. All right, so there's your fancy yellow, and that's an oval shaped. Now we're going to slide the tray over and we're going to bring in there the fancy intense, and you can see the jump in darkness and vividness of the color. I really shouldn't use that word vivid, because this diamond isn't classified as a vivid, but you can see the depth of color more so in this fancy intense from the fancy yellow. All right, now that's a 469 and this diamond is a 521, and there is a price differential between these two diamonds, you know, jumping from about that 60K zone to about 115, so roughly double, because of the intensity of color. You know, of course you do have your other aspects like clarity that go into effect as well in determining the value in fancy shapes as well, and also the presence or absence of fluorescence. But just to give you an idea, that 460, that 4.5 carat oval is a VS2 in clarity, and the 521 cushion next to it is an SI1. All right. Now we're going to bring on the screen the fancy vivid. Okay, which is also that diamond is an SI1. Also, that's the diamond we saw in the GIA report before, and you can see that's a radiant cut. And look at the depth of color in that one. So this is what is properly classified as a fancy vivid. All absolutely beautiful. Up here though is where we're getting to Jolly Rancher goodies. Okay. And a beautiful, beautiful demonstration of the difference from fancy yellow to fancy intense to fancy vivid. All right, and just to let you see a comparison of two similar shapes, here is another radiant cut. That is a fancy, it's a fancy intense, it's not a fancy vivid. Okay, so I have that one laying on its side. but you could see your color difference from your fancy intense. So these two diamonds on either side now would be both fancy intense, and again with your fancy vivid right in the middle. All right, and there is observing the color differences from fancy yellow to fancy vivid. There you go. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned from it. Thank you for watching.